Climate chaos in that sense is undercutting human rights in the world, and therefore not only immoral but also a source of continuing crisis in many places of the world. So therefore it is in the interest of a more peaceful and a more dignified world society to combat climate change.
Nuclear is very expensive.
Nuclear power is simply not viable economically.
Nuclear power, it's much too slow and much too late.
One accident can be devastating.
We don't know how to get rid of the nuclear waste.
It is prone to be exploited by military forces, by terrorist forces. It is the choice of an energy which will increase the risks in this world.
Nuclear power. So the nuclear industry says, well, look, aren't we at least part of the solution? We may not be the whole solution, but we don't emit CO2, and we have to deal with climate change, so nuclear power should be on the agenda.
A sudden revival also of the nuclear lobby has two reasons, basically. The one reason is that many countries are attempting to prepare themselves for a post-oil future. On the other hand, many countries are attempting to cut their CO2 emissions while they try to become more climate friendly. Nuclear power seems to provide an answer for these two necessities.
France is a quintessential nuclear power. 70% of its energy is nuclear electricity. But what you don't know is that 40% of all the water consumed in France each year goes to cooling the nuclear reactors. 40% of all the water in France. And when the water comes back heated from the nuclear reactors, it's dehydrating lakes and streams that are already being impacted by climate change and drought.
When you build a nuclear power plant, you use large amounts of cement. Cement contributes enormously to global warming. When you mine uranium and process the uranium to make low-enriched uranium, which you use in a nuclear power plant, you use a lot of energy. So the benefits on the environmental side, while probably positive, are less than might otherwise seem to be the case when you take into account all the other parts, all the other things that go into generating nuclear energy.
It takes 7 years to plan a nuclear power plant. It takes another 7 years in order to construct it and to bring power onto the grid. And it takes another 7 years again until repay the energy spent in order to construct a nuclear power plant. So basically, it takes 20 years, 21 years, in order to turn nuclear power into a useful instrument. 20 years is definitely a much too long of a time when it comes to acting against the climate crisis. Most scientists agree that it's the next 8 to 15 years which are going to be the crucial years.
Let me give you the business reasons why nuclear power is not really a functional solution, not the ideological reasons. There are 439 nuclear power plants in the world today. They only make up 5% of all the energy we produce. But to address climate change, the nuclear industry would be responsible not for 5% of the energy. That won't address climate change. The nuclear industry would have to be responsible for generating 20% of our energy. That means that to do that, we'd have to put under construction, listen to these figures, 3 nuclear power plants under construction every 30 days, year in and year out for 60 years. Does anyone really believe we're going to do that?
Nuclear power is simply not viable economically. It's extraordinarily costly. And if you work out the economics, it's not there.
I personally think it may not be the wisest option. If we look at all the options that lay on the table, nuclear is very expensive, so often costs are underestimated.
Any utility that wants to build a nuclear power plant will have to assume the responsibility for disposing of the waste. They will have to absorb the cost of finding an insurance company that will insure the reactor against a possible accident. And they will have to include in the electricity rates the cost not only of constructing the reactor, but of decommissioning it when it's worn out. And what we've discovered in the States is that it may cost more to decommission a nuclear power plant than to build it to begin with. So when we include all the costs, nuclear power does not get out of the starting blocks. It's simply not competitive.
So far, every nuclear power plant effectively has become economically viable only with government subsidies, only with government-provided insurance.
Remember that when Mrs. Thatcher was in power, Margaret Thatcher in the UK, one of the things that she was doing was privatizing various industries like the railroads, the utilities, and so forth. When they decided to privatize the utilities, the way they did it was they put all the power plants that the government owned, coal and gas and nuclear, on the market. And they sold them to private investors. Right? They sold them all, except the nuclear power plants. They did not get a single bid from any investor on any of the nuclear power plants in the UK. Already built, already operating. The investors knew if they bought a nuclear power plant, they suddenly would have to bear the cost of disposing of the waste, the cost of decommissioning the plant when it was worn out, and they realized it was simply not a viable investment.
Nuclear power relies on a fuel which is finite. Uranium is in principle as finite as it is oil.
The International Atomic Energy Commission says we run into uranium deficits even with the existing nuclear power plants between 2025 and 2035. So the price of uranium is going to go up.
But the other part is that what do you do with the waste of the nuclear, the material that gets spent at the end? What do you do about the risks?
How do we get rid of the nuclear waste? We are 60 years into the nuclear technology revolution. We still do not know how to transport and dispose of the nuclear waste. In the 1950s, when I was growing up, the nuclear industry said, build the nuclear power plants, then later we'll figure out how to secure the waste and store them. They still don't know how. This is an industry that says, trust us because we have expert engineering, but they can't get rid of their own waste. In my country, the United States, we spent 18 years and $9 billion to build a vault underneath a mountain called Yucca Mountain to put the waste in with the idea that the waste would be secure for 10,000 years. This building, this vault, $8 billion, 18 years, is not even open yet. It's already leaking 10,000 years in advance.
In the United States, we have 103 nuclear power plants, all of which are at least 30 years old now. We still do not have a permanent waste disposal facility, but we have invested in developing one under Yucca, Y-U-C-C-A mountain in Nevada. Not any waste in it yet.
So anybody arguing for nuclear today implicitly argues for a system of energy that is prone to be exploited by military forces, by terrorist forces. In other terms, it is the choice of an energy which will increase dangers